Mumbai studios of Republic TV, it's time for Arnab Goswami on the debate.
Arnab Goswami on the debate at 10, powered by Royal Ranthambore, Green Lamb, Apollo 24/7 and Poco Mobiles.
Every single evening when we have debates on what America is doing, how far Ukraine is stretching it on NATO, we have a whole lot of people, especially from the US, who point the finger back at us and say, India is answerable to the world. Well, I've said it from day one that I think Indian foreign policy has been a masterclass of neutrality and responsibility as far as the whole Ukraine situation is concerned. From giving it back to America to engaging Japan and Australia and checking China. India's diplomacy has left even its biggest critics stunned. We're buying Russian oil and we stand with Quad. And we're looking out for the interests of 1.3 billion Indians. This nation-first approach is why the Modi government masterclass is my second debate tonight.
I don't know how many world leaders Putin may listen to, but the status of Modi ji makes me hopeful that in case of his strong voice, Putin at least should think over. We are asking for your strong voice to stop this war.
Several attempts have been made to convince India to take a side in this war between Russia and Ukraine, but India has stood firm. While condemning the killings of civilians, India has asked both sides to maintain restraint, a stand West cannot digest.
India could take up the Russian offer, what would be your message to India or any other country?
Well, our message to any country continues to be that also think about where you want to stand.
While America is giving veiled threat every second day, the Modi's diplomacy has forced the world to take a notice, a no-nonsense approach. Consider this, while we may be in the same Quad grouping with America, Japan and Australia, the stand of others apart from America tells you the story.
भारत जापान आर्थिक पार्टनरशिप न सिर्फ दोनों देशों को बल्कि क्षेत्र और विश्व को भी विश्वास और रेजिलियंस प्रदान करेगी.
On Ukraine, I think it was clear that the two sides had referred to the Quad summit in which the leaders had a fairly clear perspective that the situation in Ukraine should not impact on the Indo-Pacific, and that the focus and priority of the Indo-Pacific for the Quad and for our countries should continue.
Japan is investing more. Australia is committed to India ties, and New Delhi is pushing for its non-aligned agenda. We will buy oil from Russia, whether the West likes it or not.
In the financial year 2021, we imported 14 million metric tons of crude from the United States, and that this represented 7.3% of our requirements, as against the less than 1% from the Russian Federation.
India's diplomacy today even being lauded by its adversaries. Listen to this.
साथ वाला हमारा मुल्क है हिंदुस्तान. मैं आज हिंदुस्तान को दाद देता हूं. इन्होंने हमेशा आजाद फॉरेन पॉलिसी रखी. आज हिंदुस्तान उनके साथ मिला हुआ है, उनका अलायंस है। क्वाड के अंदर अमेरिका का अलायंस की हुई है और अपने आप को वो कहता है मैं न्यूट्रल हूं। रूस से तेल मंगवा रहा है जबकि सैंक्शंस लगी हुई हैं, क्योंकि हिंदुस्तान की पॉलिसी।
If there is one lesson global powers must take from this war, is on how India has handled an evolving crisis. India, a fine art in diplomacy, has struck a balance not many critics would have expected. Let's debate.
And as I welcome, I'm having this debate because instead of having a daily detour, every time we debate what's happening in Ukraine and all the American guests do a detour on India, I thought might as well have a full debate on India. So Madhav Nalapat is on the debate, taking on Charles Kupchan, Jitendra Kumar Ojha, and Elena Bernini, CEO of Oxford Omnia International from London, and Mr. Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who's a Director Emeritus at the University of Coimbra, Portugal, and a distinguished legal scholar at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, USA, is joining us from Portugal. And James Russell is an Associate Professor at the Naval Postgraduate School, Department of National Security Affairs. He's joining us from California. So Charles, we have this debate. And throughout, I just want to preface this by saying that if you leave one group of people aside, everyone's really appreciating Indian foreign policy as far as this entire matter has been concerned, because we have been mature, we've been secure, we've been deft, skilled, and we are both independent as well as neutral. And it becomes necessary, Charles, for some countries to maintain, some significant countries, to maintain this sense of neutrality when the world is in this kind of crisis. That's my opening statement. Your response, then we take the debate forward. Charles.
Well, India is choosing sides. And we can have a debate about the pros and cons of NATO enlargement and whether there was a sufficient dialogue with the Russians about Ukraine's potential membership in NATO. But what we're witnessing right now is a savage, brutal, inhumane Russian attack against its neighbor, right? We're witnessing children, women, civilians being pummeled. We've seen millions of Ukrainians flee the country to take refuge in neighboring countries. Where's India? I get it. You want to sort of keep your ties with Russia. You want to buy oil from Russia. You don't want to take sides in what might be a new Cold War. But I have to say that in the end, countries need to make moral choices. They need to decide, are they on the wrong side of history or the right side of history? And so my question to you, Arnab, is where's India? Why don't you at least speak up and say Russia is committing grave violations of humanitarian international law and they should stop?
Okay. Can I respond to you with a 7-word sentence? My simple response is that I hand it over to Madhav is, why doesn't America say the same thing about China?
Well, Arnab,
yes.
Charles must probably not be knowing that among the countries that are quote-unquote on the wrong side of history are Germany, Denmark, and so many other countries, and not to mention Japan. Now, I'm sure Charles will not dispute me when I say Japan has been the most steadfast ally of the United States since 1945. And you know what's happening in Japan? Japanese companies are basically telling the Japanese government, don't try and force us to stop buying oil and gas from Russia. The Sakhalin project, in which ONGC and a Japanese consortium are involved, some elements of the Japanese government who are more loyal to America than President Biden have tried to force the Japanese partner to leave that concession so that the Chinese can jump in. Well, the Japanese oil companies have said, please don't tell us what to do. We know business, you do not. The fact is, Arnab, that the United States has a history when they feel the blowback to itself is very low of making other countries bear a very heavy sacrifice in defense of ideals, defense of democracy, defense of other things. Essentially, is defending the policy of the White House at the moment. So I only want to say very frankly that till now, they used to spare Europe from that kind of sacrifice. Now they're expecting Europe, and Europe is not stepping forward. There's a symbolic gesture of Nord Stream 2. Frankly, the Germans have lost very heavily because of that. Their economy would have gained multiple points if they had Nord Stream 2. But they are buying copiously from Nord Stream 1. 100 times more money they are paying to Russia than India is paying. And Jen Psaki is talking about India. Why? Because the US expects countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to be slightly different in their obedience to US interests than countries in Europe. Germany and so many other countries in Europe, Japan, who are continuing to buy oil and gas. What does Charles say about that? That they are the wrong side of history?
Let me get James in on that. Let me get James in on that. And you see, James, I think the Americans have miscalculated. America says Putin miscalculated militarily. Possibly he did. Possibly he underestimated the response of the Ukraine and resolve of the Ukrainian people, despite all the suffering. But I think America also miscalculated. America's biggest miscalculation was that they thought this would just be a military theater. It's not a military theater. It's also an economic theater. And the whole world is going to change after this, James. America will not be the pivot. Asia will be the pivot. There will be an Asia-centric geopolitical strategy instead of a US-Europe-centric one, which the US tried to create through NATO. So I think we're also looking out at our economic interests, and I think if you were only to look at this as a possible economic repositioning globally, then perhaps the Americans would not be upset with the way India has dealt with it.
Well, my view is that I think the White House is taking great pains to try to make sure that the American-Indian relationship can emerge from this crisis intact to face the challenges of the rest of the 21st century, which involve the confrontation with China. And America needs India and the other members of the Quad to be as united as they possibly can in this growing confrontation. And so I think that the Biden administration is doing its best to try to preserve its options in this regard. I would say, however, that per Mr. Kupchan's comments, we've kind of gotten past the point of this sort of theoretical, sort of discussion about countries' positions. India is the world's largest democracy. It is standing by and saying nothing, watching the slaughter of innocent civilians. That's basically what's happening. The United States would like India to step up and act like a global power with global responsibilities. And India's position on this is that it's acting more in its narrow self-interest. Of course, this is a truism of all international politics. And I think this is a wake-up call for India to sort of start handling the responsibilities that have dropped in its lap.
I think you're being extremely unfair, James, because this constant lecturing by the Americans, think about where you want to stand when history books are being written. As the minister said in our parliament today, that Russian oil contributes to less than 1%. You see, India is a huge country. That amount may seem a lot to you, but it's less than 1% of our oil needs. We take more than 7% from America. And how many prime ministers were able to hold hotlines, James, with Zelensky and Putin asking for de-escalation, consistently call for talks from both sides without supplying weapons to either sides. I think the terrible thing in this kind of a situation is to keep supplying weapons and say, go to war. Go to war. Let's escalate the war. And then, James, you say, well, you know, so many people are suffering. Are you doing well by supplying all kinds of weapons to the Ukrainians and fighting a proxy war?
You want me to respond to this?
Yes, please.
We are responding to a sovereign country that has been invaded, aggressively invaded by another state. It's a complete violation of international law, the United Nations Charter. So the United States and its NATO partners, contrary to what the earlier speaker said, we're standing united. The Europeans are prepared to accept, I think, significant costs that we are asking them to bear, you know, in this confrontation with Russia. And I think the Biden administration is treading a fine line, of course, in trying to fashion the kind of assistance program to help the Ukrainians defend themselves.
I can take a call. James, in a war, you are filling Ukraine with weapons and you're putting the blame on India. That's very unfair. While we have gone out of our way with humanitarian aid for the Ukrainian people. I want Jitendra to come in. I want Professor D'Souza Santos to come in. What do you think? Professor Santos, let me go to you first in Portugal. What do you think, sir?
Well, what I'm thinking is that, of course, I'm against the invasion of Ukraine, as I have been against so many other invasions and atrocities in which Russia has not been involved, like Libya, like Syria, like Afghanistan, like Iraq, and I have never seen such a reaction like this. I think it's dangerous that the geopolitical interests of the United States prevail over the world, because the United States are an empire, and an empire, declining empire. And in fact, the struggle is not with the Ukraine, not even with Russia, is with China in the future. I think that for no, frivolous reasons, 35 countries in the world abstained from condemning Russia, half of the population of the world. Why? Because they are in favor of invasions? No, they are against invasions. If you look at the speeches there, from Lebanon to South Africa, people say we are against invasions. From France, from the United States, from Israel, from any other country. So we are against, and I'm against, of course. So I think that we have to care about the future of the world, and what we are witnessing is the fact that the United States is trying, I have never seen sanctions like this, and we could even imagine that the United States wants to expel Russia from the United Nations. I mean, they expel them from SWIFT. They apply so many sanctions that all of a sudden, Russia could be erased from the map, or the United States want a regime change in Moscow. I mean, it's too much at this point.
Yes.
And I think that India should care about its interests. It's a very large democracy, a tradition of neutrality, and keep before its eyes its main interests concerning the future of the region.
I actually think, Professor Santos, that the way in which the Indian Prime Minister has brought people of different views together on global forums, whether it be at the climate summit, I think, of course, India has played a role and continues to play a role. But I'm not sure, Elena, if Biden is doing the responsible thing. After all, calling other leaders names, even if he was prompted to coming and saying Putin is a war criminal, how is that helping the situation right now? You're filling Ukraine with weapons, you're using very strong language, you're threatening a third world war kind of situation. How is that helping the people of Ukraine? How is that helping the people of Ukraine, Alina?
Well, the U.S. is right in reminding us to take our collective responsibility. And frankly, India must take the high moral ground and condemn Russia's invasion and gross violation of international law. And let me tell you why. It's very easy. It's because Russia it has great influence on India, and so India is depending economically and militarily on Russia.
No.
but Russia is friend with China. And this is really the heart of the problem. Russia is friend with China, and China should not be trusted. So dictators are basically taking a side. Dictators are joining forces together and are taking a side every day. They are deciding to continue this conflict and gross violation of international law and targeting of civilians.
Alina,
So
Alina,
therefore,
I think,
yeah.
Alina, if I may just intervene, I completely disagree with your assessment. I think you should be first aware that the Indian economy is much larger than the Russian economy. And to call a larger economy dependent on a smaller economy is, I think, you've got the wrong perspective. You're looking at the thing through a colonial lens. The India of today is a very powerful nation economically. We are not dependent on the Russians. Yes, we trade with them, but you are making too much of it. As our minister said in Parliament today, that huge amount of oil imports that you're saying we get from Russia is 1% of India's needs. I think you're not.
I understand your point.
Yeah.
Can I say,
and one more point. As far as China is concerned, Alina, as far as China is concerned, and I'd like Dr. Roja to actually respond. You see, India and China are two large countries, competing economies, competing strategically, but we deal with them. When we deal with them, we deal with them alone. When the Chinese were aggressive in Galwan, we pushed them back. There was a military confrontation on both sides, and then we talked. So we didn't go to the Russians for help when we were dealing with the Chinese. So I think your perspective on India being dependent on China, on Russia economically and strategically is wrong. But Dr. Jitendra Ojha, we're not coming from a position of weakness. We're coming from a position of choice. Dr. Ojha.
I definitely agree. You are coming from a position of choice. Yes, and what I meant more about the economic side was more about.
Can you please let me speak?
Yes.
It was about the military and army supply from Russia. So it's not more on an economic side, but rather on India reliance on army supply, which it's undeniable. This is undeniable that
India I agree with you. We do import a lot from Russia.
Can you please?
But in recent years, we've deleveraged ourselves there as well. Yes, please, Jitendra Ojha, please.
Yes, what has happened, Arnab, that Americans, not only their democracy is in decline, even their strategic thinking is in decline. So many times I've heard former American ambassadors in Moscow and British ambassadors in Moscow, they have been complaining that their country is still rooted, their policies are still rooted in the Cold War era. After, disintegration of Soviet Russia, there was absolutely no requirement for them to go for this kind of confrontation. And you see, they are not in this region. India is not for any public spectacle. We are in this region, and we have to be responsible for peace, security, and stability of this region. We require goodwill of Russia. We don't require goodwill of Russia for the sake of Russia. We require goodwill of Russia for the sake of our own credibility. United States has lost its credibility almost everywhere. With change in government, they have been changing friends. Let me also tell you, Arnab, that it is very unfortunate to see the kind of influence, lobbying and various sections, etc., they have in the US foreign policy. And that is why their foreign policy is being held hostage by all shades of vested interest.
My concern is, Jitendra, sorry to intervene, but this breaking news just came in. No, I think why we are having this debate is Charles, it's not about justifying Indian foreign policy. I'm actually coming from a position of great concern today and a position of great empathy, because we see an escalation on a daily basis. Maybe when you're in US or if you're going to be in Ukraine or even Russia, you will not look at it that way. The way we look at it is, every day we are inching together, Charles, towards a very, very, very dangerous situation. Breaking news is coming in, viewers, that Russia has terminated negotiations on a peace treaty with Japan. Now, this is big. And the Russian Foreign Ministry has reported that Russia is halting visa-free travel for Japanese citizens to certain areas. So, question is, every day we are inching towards that position of massive, massive confrontation, Charles. And as far as, I think the world will need people, need countries, and need leaders who don't automatically take sides. Don't you also think, Charles, that if you look at Prime Minister Narendra Modi's foreign policy, for example, he brings everyone together at the climate summit, people from various hard positions. We talk both to the Israelis, a fantastic relationship. We also talk to the Palestinians. We buy billions of dollars of arms from Europe. We bought fighter jets from France. We also get the S-400 from Russia. And we have an excellent relationship with UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are not even picking up the phone with Biden right now. So it's not a balancing act. It's an interest. I just feel, Charles, that you're not recognizing the change in the Indian position, say, pre-2014 and now.
I understand where you're coming from, Arnab, and your colleagues, right? You want to buy oil from Russia? Okay. You want to buy arms from Russia? Okay. But at least speak up. At least recognize that what's going on here is an unprovoked attack against a sovereign neighbor. Right? India would not be happy if the world stood by idly while your country got attacked by China, by Russia, by anybody else. So what we're asking here is just speak up.
Who's not speaking up?
Say this
no, but this is so. I mean, this is
how can sovereign country.
No, I'm sorry.
This is not debatable.
No, I'm sorry, but unlike Americans, no, Charles, now you're pushing it. Charles, you're pushing it.
On the side of morality.
Charles, you're pushing it. Unlike America, we don't provide lip service. America has been condemning this war and sponsoring it for the last 26 days.
It's not sponsoring the war. Russia attacked Ukraine.
I'm sorry, you've not lifted a finger.
The United States should not help
okay, here's one question. Here's a question.
Here's a question. Watch television?
No, okay, so here's a question. Here's a question. Here's a question to you.
Civilian cities?
No. One second.
Come on.
One second. You've not lifted a finger. Zelensky has pleaded with your Congress. He has pleaded for a no-fly zone. You're not doing anything to end it. And you constantly now put the finger at other countries like India. I don't know, Mr. Professor Santos seems to be amused. It's almost as if India began the war. We haven't begun the war. We are trying our best to do what we can to stop it. And of course, looking at our national interest. Professor Santos.
Well, I think it's usual that the United States has a very unilateral vision of the world and is always concerned with its geopolitical interests and not with the interests of the other countries. And at this point, in fact, we know that what is at stake is the dollar, is the status of the dollar, which is what is sustaining a declining economy in the United States. And of course, the idea that the dollar continues to be an international reserve currency. And usually the oil transactions are very important in this regard. And India, in fact, is trying to avoid the sanctions by following an alternative means. It's absolutely legitimate for India to try to avoid this because it's in terms of peace for the world. It's no good to isolate to such an extent Russia. Sir John Keynes, after the First World War, said the sanctions against Germany were so drastic that would provoke a reaction, and did provoke a reaction. Hitler, the Nazis. I think that we are trying to humiliate Russia to such an extent that is dangerous for the world because it's a nuclear power. Let's really think. I'm in Europe, the most violent continent in the world. 78 million people killed in the 20th century. And war is in Europe, not in the United States. The United States is protected by 2 oceans, but the war is in Europe again. And we don't want that. And that could have been avoided. Because after all, Finland is neutral, Sweden is neutral, Switzerland is neutral, Austria is neutral. Why not Ukraine?
No, I think
senseless.
Professor Santos, I think you made some really brilliant points, and I want to bring in James here. See, James, the war has really brought out the chinks in the armor of America's international clout, and it's become obvious to the world that the standing of the Americans in the world is not the same anymore. And I think, James, that America insisting on carrying on the war in the hope that it will make the world unipolar anymore, it may actually, I think, Madhav, it's going to have the opposite effect. It's the more you're pushing for that sense of unipolarity, where you're sort of lecturing and wagging your finger to the world saying, listen to us, it's having the opposite effect. I thought that you would realize that with the Biden administration's repeated efforts to persuade Saudi Arabia and the UAE to start pumping their spare crude oil capacity were rebuffed. OPEC members are sticking to the output limits they agreed with Russia before the war. So the world, instead of becoming more American unipolar, is becoming more multipolar. And I think that Biden saying, you know, he's a war criminal, we're going to teach him a lesson, I'm going to go to Poland, it's not going to help. It'll have the opposite effect, James. I'm sure it'll have the opposite effect.
Oh, what I would say, I think this is I hear you describing something that sounds kind of like an alternative reality to me, which is that the war, in fact, if anything, has increased the sense of solidarity for this thing called the liberal international order, in which, yes, it is true that the United States is taking a leading role in creating this liberal international order and trying to maintain the liberal international order. And the response of the international community to the war in Ukraine is overwhelmingly one of condemnation. And I might add that it's not just nation states that have lined up to condemn this naked agreement by Russia. It's companies of their own volition that have MasterCard and Visa, which are taking stances. It's British Petroleum. It's these companies which have taken stances of their own volition to get out of Russia and cut off the relationship with Russia. This isn't something that the United States has orchestrated all by itself. The war has single-handedly has proven to be an extremely important factor in the reinvigoration of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? This isn't something again that was orchestrated by the United States. The United States has been reinserted into a position of leadership.
I don't think so. I don't think so, James. I still believe, James. No, James.
Outside that international order.
No, James.
And it's to the detriment of Indians' interests, I would say, over the long term.
James, I want to respond to you very directly. Please understand, you do not own the liberal international order. Point number one. Point number two, you say that, you don't get where I'm coming from. You and I are still residing on the same planet. You don't own the planet. A. B, liberal international order, when you went searching for WMDs which did not exist, you said the same thing. We are saving the international global order. When you went to Afghanistan, you were saving the international global order. When you were bombing Serbia, when Kosovo happened, you were saving the global international order. And right now you are saying that you are going to put other countries in a corner. Even Bulgaria, a NATO member, is not even listening to you. They said point blank, we're not going to give military aid to Ukraine. And Lloyd Austin had visited the country to hold defense talks. Germany's thwarted you on Russian energy. So I really begin to worry that maybe it's Americans who are in an echo chamber. But Madhav wanted to respond to that. Madhav.
Well, James is probably not aware of a country called China and the pilgrimages that are being made by Western leaders to that country. It's a country that has repeatedly invaded and occupied parts of India. Fortunately, not during the time of Prime Minister Modi, when they were beaten back. They have repeatedly transgressed on our sovereignty and territorial integrity. I haven't seen any sanctions on any Chinese entity. And I wonder why. James probably thinks China is a very benign power. Judging by all the statements of Biden and Blinken and all these people looking yearningly at Xi Jinping, they obviously believe Xi Jinping is one of them. And the second point, Arnab, I'd like to remind this guy Charles that during the conflict, the kinetic phase of the conflict on the northern border, I want to repeat to you what I said on CGTN Live, that's China state television, that Russia kept supplying us weapons and spares throughout that, even the kinetic phase of the conflict. And you are talking about Russia? You're talking about Russia and China? The Russia kept on supplying weapons to us. The
Okay,
Chinese know it,
James
and
responding.
CGTN has carried
I think
on.
James, so Charles is responding.
So please,
Charles
you
is
have a
responding.
reality check.
No, 1 sec. Madhav, Charles is responding. Yes, Charles.
This is an alternative reality.
I would
This
just
is
say,
alternative
where does
reality.
China get most of its arms? From Russia, right? Where does China get its oil and gas? From Russia. And so, you have to kind of look at this in a clear-eyed way. And again, I understand where you're coming from. You don't want to
and Germany
hurt your relationship with Russia. That's okay, but at least speak up.
Well,
At least look at the world as it is and condemn a Russian attack against its sovereign neighbor.
Charles, let me tell you that this part I will on this part I'm going to respond again. If there's one country which has spoken up, it's India. But please understand, you're dealing with a country of significance. Don't talk to us like you talk to Honduras. Second point here is, and fundamentally.
How have you spoken up?
No. 1 second. You see, Charles, de-dollarization. De-dollarization has begun. De-dollarization has begun. And it's happening with the backing of China. Why don't you even question China once? You can't. You can't.
That's not true, Arnav. We have questioned China.
What have you questioned China for? What have you questioned China for? Your national security advisor flew down to Rome a few days back to plead to the Chinese.
Yeah, they flew to Rome to tell the Chinese not to support the Russians.
No, my information is that you've given them a deal on Taiwan.
Can I please get a
chance? You've given the Chinese a deal on Taiwan.
Oh, come on, Arnav.
This is
Come on.
nonsense, Arnav.
No, but what's your position on Taiwan?
It's nonsense.
What's your position on Taiwan? Why hasn't there been a strong iteration of the position on Taiwan when there have been so many statements? Why is the response from America so weak? And so truncated.
What are you talking about, Arnav? What are you talking about?
Well,
here?
I'm talking about the reality that if the Chinese move into Taiwan, what will the Americans do? Will you put feet on the ground? Will you put boots on the ground?
I thought we were here to talk about India and India's foreign policy. Now we're talking about Taiwan and
but
China.
all foreign policy is linked. All foreign policy is linked. And you, one second. Please understand, our oil imports from the US will go up by 11% this year. That's not because we are dependent on you. The sense is that you do business because you're dependent is wrong. It's synergistic. I think, Madhav, that it's a perspective. And one more thing. See, okay, James, here's a question to you, okay? You said liberal international order. Now, first of all, I don't think you should use the word liberal when the most illiberal dictatorships in the world have been sponsored by America, but nevertheless, where was the liberal international order when you hoarded vaccines at a time when India was supplying vaccines to the poorest nations of the world?
Well, I think the reality is that the United States today, under the Biden administration, is taking a leading role in
Professor
supply
Santos.
of vaccines all over the world. Now,
Madhav, you said
we criticize the Biden administration on various fronts, but I don't think this is one of them.
I said here, UTC. Okay, Madhav can respond to that. Madhav.
Look, if our American friends will allow me, and they don't cancel me out like they've canceled so many people, and for example, freedom of the press, you block RT, you block any opposing view, you call opposing views immediately treason. Now you're going to call the Republican representatives treason for not saying that it's a Putin tax and a Putin inflation, but very much a tax when President Biden is in the White House and not Putin. Look, Arnab, these chaps thought they will deter Putin. They did not. Then they thought they will stop Putin. They did not. Then they'll slow down Putin. They did not. I mean, what kind of a dream world are they living in? They're leading the whole world to World War III. And Zelensky has openly said, you come to us. If you don't come to us, World War III. If you come to us, I can assure you there will be World War III. So are you saying the United States is merrily pushing the world towards World War III?
No, see, that's my concern. I want to give the last word here to Professor Santos. Professor Santos, when both sides are provoking each other, both Russia and America and Ukraine. And Zelensky is regularly talking about World War III. And I think it's irony here that the person who talks about World War III is every day some people wanted to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. My question here is that doesn't India's role really change here? I mean, countries like India have to play a greater role in de-escalating this, I think, sooner than later.
Well, I think that what we need is attitudes like India. I mean, more attitudes like India to show some neutrality, to show that the war has never solved any problem, that humiliate Russia to the extent that the United States want in order to produce regime change and hit China is not legitimate. It will be another war. And of course, they always hope that the war will be very far away from the US borders. That's the problem of the United States. They see the wars from afar. We in Europe are watching them here very near to us, because now we have the refugees of Ukraine here already. Before, we could not get the refugees from Syria, we could not get the refugees from Afghanistan, but now we have from Ukraine. So I think it's double standards all along. I mean, what is liberal about the policies of the United States invading a country like Iraq and Libya and Syria, and goes on and on? Not to speak of Latin America, of course. So I think that, the United States always tries to forget the past in order to justify its present. But it's impossible for people to forget it. And I really have to remind the people that since Nehru time, India has had a kind of a very honorable, autonomous, neutral position with non-aligned movements. We need a new non-aligned movement in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's what we need more to avoid a war.
Yeah.
Arnab, just one statement.
Yes.
You have spent this entire show criticizing the United States. It is not the United States that has invaded Ukraine. It is Russia.
Yeah, but the United States has played a stellar role. No, Charles, you cannot take this off your conscience. You cannot take this off your conscience, Charles. The United States has played a very active and stellar role in provoking whatever is happening to the people of Ukraine. I really wish that the United States has seen this coming, and instead of provoking it, and when the people of Ukraine suffer trying to wash their hands of it, must really accept that they are at the root of whatever is happening to the people of Ukraine. They're the very root of it, and I hope.
I don't understand why you want to.
Well, because I can give you because the level of American interest. America was obsessed with Ukraine. America was obsessed strategically and militarily with Ukraine. That's why I'll take this debate forward another time. I disagree with you politely.